Recording in progress.
Go. We're back again with the Broken Brain. Hello, everybody out there in Broken Brain land, all you brainiacs out there that are listening and tuning in. Grateful to have you. This is, of course, Dwight, your host for this dose of mental health and mental awareness and mental hygiene. By the way, it's a term we don't use much. I just used it now. Really exciting topic to cover today. It's been a while since we've talked about TBI, which of course stands for traumatic brain injury, and some of the dynamics that have to do with that. You can find it in our back catalog, but like I say, it's been a while, and I'm really grateful to have my guest here today. I'm joined by Kelly Tuttle, who is the author of After the Crash, and an expert and specialist in this area, and also you have some of your your own experience and experiences helping others to share. Really excited to have you. Welcome, Kelly, to the Broken Brain.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't you take a little time to tell people all about who you are and where you've come from to wind up in a specialty like TBI?
Well, it all started with a car crash. So I was driving home from my job where I was working as a cardiology nurse practitioner, and I was kind of on a rural road, and a teenager pulled out in front of me at the last minute, and I T-boned her. Ooh. And a long story short, I thought I would shake it off, get better. I later on found out I was not getting better, and eventually started my road to recovery. And along the way, I was reading a lot about the brain, how to recover from a traumatic brain injury. Fell in love with the idea of working in neurology, and worked and studied and begged my way into a neurology nurse practitioner position where I've been ever since.
Wonderful.
And five years after my car accident, I started writing my book because one of the biggest things after my car accident was I wanted to get back to work as soon as possible. And I found some really wonderful books to help me recover, but none of them were specific to getting back to work or for an average Joe like me who was just in a car accident. A lot of stuff that I saw at the time was if you were in the military or if you were an athlete or a child. And so I really wanted to put everything I learned and benefited from into a book for others like me, average Joes who have a traumatic brain injury from a fall or a car accident, and support the book to support them to keep their jobs, stay in school, and essentially live life after brain injury, hopefully to give them hope that they will get better and stronger.
It's quite a powerful maneuver, so to speak, to see a deficit and then create a solution for it. I've been lucky enough to meet through the podcast a lot of people who have done that and said, this specific wrinkle that I needed help with didn't seem to exist. And so I went ahead and created, wrote, gathered, started an organization for whatever it is, right? And so that's very, very cool. One of the things, people don't really think about that as much, of saying, like, how do I get back to aspects of my life and work and doing activities as well, and how we integrate with other people is a whole part of our identity. I had a mortgage broker actually who, when he found out what I did for a living as we were preparing the mortgage and all this, and he was helping to put all that through, however that works, having, bought a home before, I still don't know quite how it works. I think it involves going into a room and people saying like, you owe a lot of money to this bank now. But anyway, this is a really cool guy and he's helping. And at some point he's like, oh, you work with it. Yeah. and he told me he had suffered a TBI, and he kind of pointed to his assistant out there and said, I had to get an assistant who can do certain things that are harder for me to do now to work through. And he'd had to accommodate that. But the fact that he, was a point of real satisfaction for him that he was able to stay in his industry. So I loved hearing that when you're talking about being able to continue to work, to stay in school, to be able to continue to do things people would like to do. That's pretty cool. What kinds of things do you notice, or did you notice, as far as some of the obstacles to that?
A huge obstacle was the neurofatigue, and I kind of blame the neurofatigue for the issues of light sensitivity or sound sensitivity that I still have, because the more tired you get, the less your brain's able to filter things out for you. And figuring out that was an issue for me took a long time. And I didn't even learn like really good tools until like 4 years into my recovery.
Wow.
And that's when I discovered noise canceling technology. Before I was using earplugs or, those headphone, the earmuffs that you wear for gun shooting.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're kind of finding products that were not necessarily intended for filtering. They were intended for sound stopping then.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. And, they're not comfortable, and you end up hearing your voice echo, and you can't use them if you're going to have to talk on the phone or
Sure.
with someone in the office. So I just wanted to kind of bring all those like mistakes I made and struggles and put it together in one area so that people could access it really quickly. Mm-hmm. Instead of taking 4 years to figure it out.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the fatigue. And that's interesting to me that it took a while for you to kind of notice it. Did you just chalk it up to normal, I'm just tired a lot kind of feeling? Or do you feel like it took a while to sort of ferret out that was a symptom of the injury?
Right. So, I did not realize that it was a symptom of the injury. In fact, I think I know, I should say, that I lacked a lot of self-awareness the first few months after my brain injury. And with that being said, I was trying to push myself to go back to my regular life, which included training in martial arts and working full time and having an hour commute each way. And what happened was that I ended up falling asleep at the wheel. And it's crazy, but I was driving and I was thinking, oh, I'm getting tired. Let me just lay back my head and close my eyes. I mean, who thinks of that? No normal person thinks that's okay.
While driving is what you're saying.
While driving.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that, and I ended up driving off the road, and I almost ran into a tree. I was able to slam on the brakes, wake up, slam on the brakes and prevent that.
Is this a second? This is after the initial crash
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. So the
like a couple months later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so then I go, oh, okay, I'm getting tired on the way driving home. So what I'll do is I'll take a nap halfway on the drive at home. So I'll take a nap on the side of a road, which is not safe. And then I'll drive the rest of the way home. And I was doing that. This is crazy thinking. This is not, realistic thinking like, oh, there's something wrong, I should see my doctor about it or mention it. So I go on.
There's a lot. It's interesting though. There's a lot of avoidance of those things. If I go to the doctor, he's going to tell me something's wrong. And at least if I don't know, then nothing's wrong, which is not. And I think a lot of us have that, right? Of like, I'll just avoid getting diagnosed because that's depressing. But in this case, yeah, you're saying how there was danger involved, which, to be honest, I mean, if we neglect our medical health, there's almost always some danger involved, right? But
right.
Yeah. In this case, very pronounced, specific danger.
Yes, and it wasn't more like I was avoiding hearing bad news. It was just I was clueless to put A and B together, okay. And the reason why just to go on a little tangent, the reason why I bring that up is that it's really important after someone has a concussion to do follow up on them, and make sure when you do follow up with them that they're with a caregiver, so that because there is that lack of self-awareness that so therefore they're not going to report what they should be reporting to you.
I see.
And the caregiver can let you know, no, this is what's really going on. So that's really, really important. Because I've also seen that in some of my patients, that they're not aware of their limitations and what's really going on. But I can tell what's going on because of the conversation I'm having with them. Anyway, that was a tangent. So then
Not at all. No, I think that's actually the first thought popped in my head is that's a really good tip for people, because I also imagine there are times where people might walk out of the medical appointment without necessarily being like, okay, A, B, C, D was said. It's like, it's helpful anyway to have another person to be like, no, don't forget about what E, I think is where I was in the alphabet. Yeah.
Yeah. And usually you send them home with a list of things that tells them when to come back, or let the provider know when to come back. And it's dizziness, nausea, vomiting, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't mention falling asleep. And it doesn't mention not being able to concentrate when there's other noises around, or getting a headache with bright lights. So the follow-up really needs to occur, and not be that responsibility of follow-up should not be put on the patient, because they may not have the ability to know that something wrong is going on and that they need to come back to you.
Wow. So you're being put in a position where the follow-up is complicated by the symptoms in a way, right? The application of whatever they're saying you should do is directly interrupted by the symptoms of the condition, which if we're not planning for that, once again, that seems to be something we should plan for.
Right. And I think that's, yeah. And I think that's how these patients fall through the cracks, and they end up either committing suicide or attempting suicide because they develop mental health issues. They end up losing their job because they didn't realize they needed accommodations to support their ability to continue to work. And with that, or they end up in a divorce because there's a personality change and mood issues. If there's a little bit of if there's some follow-up, then a lot of trouble can be prevented. And I personally, there isn't a lot of guidelines on how to treat people with traumatic brain injury out there. They're working on it, but we're not there yet. And so for my patients, what I do is I see them initially, and then I'll do a 2-week follow-up, and then a 2-week after that. So it's a 1 month after the impact. And then I'll do a 3-month follow-up if they're fine, and a 3-month after that, and then a 6, and then a 6, and then a year. But of course, there's those individuals who just recover really quickly, and they don't have any residual effects, and go on to live their life. But those individuals that do have the cognitive impairments, I do follow up, and it's amazing because as they heal, the symptoms change. One symptom becomes less noticeable, and another, which allows another symptom to rear its ugly head.
It seems like TBI itself is kind of it's like a big umbrella that covers a whole lot of different things too, right? Does that complicate the treatment, that there's so many different sort of methods of injury? I mean, it can be chemical, it could be, we usually think of kind of like blunt force trauma, right? Kind of a thing, but yet there's all kinds of different parts, stages of life, or things where our brain can get injured a number of different ways. Does that make it complicated?
Oh, yes. In fact, the saying in the industry is once you've seen one traumatic brain injury, you've seen one traumatic brain injury. Because everyone's reaction to the injury, everyone's recovery is as different as their personalities. And that's what I like to tell my patients. And you don't only just want to think about impact patients, but you want to think about a patient who has a history of hypoxia, or lead or monoxide poisoning, stroke. Sometimes we forget that those people are also need help because of their brain injury.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Whether there's an underlying medical cause or condition that just like a stroke, like you say, that we don't often talk about it in those terms. In fact, I have found that people I've known over the years who have had concussions, multiple concussions, and maybe even concussive disorder of some kind, they're not always familiar with applying the term to it. And I think there's a conceptual maybe benefit from putting things in the right category, right? And to say like, that's a traumatic, concussion's a traumatic brain injury. And we know that. And I think a lot of doctors probably say it, but I've known a lot of people who nobody ever brought that up.
Right. And I do see some discussion out there with various researchers and groups that study traumatic brain injury is kind of getting away from just saying concussion or either putting them in categories like cervical injury type concussion, or they put them in based on their symptoms. They put them in categories. And I've seen some talk about that. And then I've also read some papers where they're trying to get away from saying mild, moderate, and severe also. But it's still all in the works and not close to the clinical office yet.
What do you say to people about how they locate medical support that is, up to the job, so to speak?
Yeah, so I would recommend, and I recommend in my book, is that you seek a specialist that does have some experience with traumatic brain injury. Like one of the stories I tell is I saw 3 endocrinologists trying to figure out why I had this chronic fatigue. And one endocrinologist said there was no relationship between no endocrinology reason why I would be fatigued after traumatic brain injury, which is not true. We now know that the pituitary gland can be injured during a brain injury. And then the next endocrinologist I saw had me waiting in his waiting room for 2 hours. And so I got to see him say goodbye to a lot of his patients. And all the women he told, you need to stop your birth control pill. That's going to help your chronic fatigue. And he told me the same thing. And so I just didn't think that was right. So I then saw a third endocrinologist and then had a cortisol stress hormone type test, and then was finally diagnosed with hypopituitarism with some mild growth hormone deficiency. So it really does depend on the provider. I would definitely ask if they have experience with treating brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries or concussions. And if you're not happy with the visit or the information that you got or the treatment, don't hesitate to get a second opinion.
Yeah, I think
or maybe a third.
Yeah. Well, in your case, right. In your case, it took a couple to get through, right? It's such a hard balance because I think we're both inundated with information, and, mixed blessing as a medical professional. I'm sure, people come in with a WebMD self-diagnosis. And at the same time, more and more people are learning like actual good places to go. It's different if someone comes in with somebody on a subreddit said this versus the Mayo Clinic's website indicates that research says this. Can you help me? And so knowing where to research, we're conditioned to think we probably shouldn't, and I should just do whatever the professional tells me to do. I don't know if that was an obstacle for you, but I know a lot of people have a hard time trusting themselves enough to say, do I know when to seek that second or third opinion? Because it takes a little bit of build up to say, I'm confident enough that something's wrong that they're not catching. I don't know if you found that. A lot of people do find that that's very intimidating.
Yes. And when you're not feeling well, you're not really strong enough to advocate yourself through something that difficult. One of the things I found useful when trying to find traumatic brain injury providers was going to a support group of traumatic brain injury survivors. So I would definitely recommend that. Like if you've had a stroke, go to a support group for strokes. Mm-hmm. Try to get one that's local and then ask who are their doctors? What do they think? Because I didn't even ask, and they were talking when I was in this group, they were talking about various doctors in the area that were good at managing traumatic brain injuries. But it's hard. It's really, really hard to find those people on your own.
Interesting.
And then there's the Brain Injury of America website. I think it's BIA.com. They have a list of providers and lawyers that you can reach out to in your local area also.
And many states also have, I've noticed that when you look at some of the nationwide resources, they direct back to, some states have their own. I know here in Utah where I live, there is a Utah Brain Injury Association as well. And so sometimes you can find that. And I found also NAMI sometimes has resources to show you where support groups are as well. So there's a few, but it's also hard though when you, this has come up on the last several programs I've recorded. For some reason, the whole COVID trauma still comes up. Who knows why? No, but there's a psychological trauma, part of which we don't always talk about is separation from those types of resources. So many support groups just shut down. Some went to Zoom and things, but it's a little harder to find access to things. And now that we're having those pick back up, anyway, so, there's an interruption in people's support care and mental health care and medical care due to a lot of the stuff we've been through as a society, too. So it really complicates things and make it very hard when it was already hard anyway to find those resources, right? So
right. But you could just call in and talk to someone and they can help direct you to find that information.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned something very important, which is a caregiver, somebody or a loved one or a support system person who can help. And that was one of the questions I had was, do you have any feelings of what helps, what doesn't help? Sort of, I don't know, do's and don'ts for those who are trying to support or help someone who's been through a traumatic brain injury. Other ideas of obviously that would help, if being willing to come along to an appointment if they want you to.
Yeah, right. So a trusted friend or a family member, for sure, bring them along. I recommend bringing an advocate, a caregiver or a patient advocate to any appointment. When you're not feeling well, you're stressed and you may not hear everything you're supposed to hear. And so I love it when my patients have somebody with them. That person can come in and with a notebook and pen write down the conversations, the questions that were asked and the answers that they got. And then that can be saved for the patient later to look on.
Yeah. That's wise.
And the other thing too. Yeah. The other thing too is writing down your questions prior to going to the appointment and having that with you also, because I have seen my patients come in and say, oh, I had a question I was going to ask, but I can't remember. It's like, ugh.
Yeah.
You need to write those down and bring them in.
Especially if this is a 6 month or a 3 month, it's like, oh, I'm going to remember it in the parking lot. I think it's a really good idea for everybody out there too. And I like how you mentioned that for the support person or caregiver to also write some things down, because just because they haven't added traumatic doesn't mean they're going to remember it correctly either. It's like,
exactly.
I mainly remember he said this, I don't know, but I want you to do this, so I'll repeat it. And so writing it down, I think is helpful, those questions and things like that. Are there any things that people, tend to either they should do that they don't know, or maybe things that they don't should do? That's not how to say that. I don't know why it came out that way. Things that they might think are helpful, but are not as helpful. Any thoughts about any of that?
Oh, you mean for the caregivers?
Yeah, yeah. Someone who's trying to support a person in their life, maybe who's had that injury.
Um, don't get into arguing. Sometimes, of course, this is more someone with a moderate brain injury to severe. They will ruminate on something, and you kind of just want to let them go and not argue. You say what you need to say at the one time, and then let it go. And then if they keep repeating it and repeating it, what I've found helpful is saying, "Hey, John, you told me blah blah blah. Repeat what they said. You've told me that now 4 times. Just wanted to let you know that your brain has told me this 4 times, not you, your brain."
So still talking about it, but not in an aggressive or attacking way, right?
Right. And then there's also difficulty with the mood swings. People can have outbursts of anger, and to try not to take it personally, and kind of, you really want to take the person out of the situation that might be triggering that emotion, if you can, and then not take it personally, and talk to them later about, your brain said this, or your brain did this. I'm just going to let you know. And so I think this triggered it. So next time we're in this environment where it might get triggered, I want you to try to use your techniques that your therapist told you to use to de-escalate that trigger, and try not to get to that outburst, but just not taking it personally, realizing that the person doesn't intend to yell or be angry. It's the reaction of their brain.
Yes. Okay. I like the way you say that. Is that a way that you talk to yourself about, or talked to yourself as you've gone through some recovery? Is saying, "Oh, my brain wants me to do this," or that kind of thing?
Yeah. Sometimes, early in my recovery, I would get really irritable if someone tried to talk to me, like while I was cooking or trying to do something, and I would snap and be grumpy. And then I would look at either it was my husband or one of my kids, and I would say, "I'm sorry, that was my brain. It was getting overwhelmed, and I needed to focus on this. What is it that you need from me?"
Okay.
And then they learned not to come and talk to me while I was cooking or paying bills or anything like that.
That brings up something else I wondered, which what's the balance between pushing oneself towards recovery and maybe acceptance of these are now things I have to do differently, right? That seems like that's a tricky balance, maybe.
It is a tricky balance, and there is you really do need to push yourself to continue to grow and get stronger, but you don't want to push yourself to the point where you regress and you are back on the recovery couch and unable to do anything, or sleeping, several hours to recover. You don't want to get to the point where you lose a week or a few days because you'd pushed yourself so hard, but you do want to slowly push yourself so you can get kind of that neuroplasticity working, and get better and stronger, and so forth. One of the things I did, and I recommend in my book, was journaling. And that's how I discovered what would trigger my brain injury symptoms. And what I would do is try to either avoid or limit exposures to those triggers. And that's where I discovered like the sound sensitivity or the light sensitivity. And then when you kind of address those symptoms, you implement compensatory tools, then you're able to kind of protect your small amount of brain injury and brain energy and be able to apply it to things like reading a little bit longer or working on a computer longer. And that's kind of how you do that forward, back push as you go through time.
That's interesting that there's a sort of an incremental or step-by-step kind of is what you're talking about, kind of taking it almost like you are experimenting with a little bit of push to see if I can go this far, and then a little bit next time to see if I can go that far.
Exactly. So say you can only read a paragraph in a book. And if you can get to the point where you can read that paragraph and not need a nap or to rest, then you would try to read 2 paragraphs. But if you got to the point where you needed to take a nap, then you know that you've pushed it to the point where you're kind of pushing it too much. You're getting to the point where you're going to regress. So you stick to the 2 paragraphs for a while, 2 paragraphs, and then you push it even more as time goes by.
Do you find that kind of the traditional psychotherapy is helpful, or are there other therapies that are more helpful at first?
On my journey, I met up with several different therapists. One was a social worker counselor. Mm-hmm. And from that person, I learned mindfulness. And that is a tool that you can use to help heal from a brain injury. And then I did meet with a psychologist, and I had a psychological testing done. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot that I still maintained my IQ points, my intelligence, but that's where I learned that where my brain would just tire out. And so that was reassuring that I was still smart, because that's one of the things you think when you have a brain injury is like, oh, I'm stupid. No, I'm not smart. But that's not true. You still have the learning capability. It's just that the way you learn and the energy you have to learn is just different. And then I also met with a psychologist who specialized in traumatic brain injury. And he did warn me, I learned a lot from him. And he did warn me that if I continued working full time and doing the things that I was doing, I would burn myself out. And so he did recommend planning for an early retirement. So there's a lot of, so you have your psychiatrist, which is, they have a medical degree. And if you have issues with mood or sleep, they're a great person to see, because they're going to help manage your medications for those types of things. And then a psychologist can help you, with therapy, and counselors can help you with cognitive behavioral therapy that'll help you kind of get over, say, adjusting to your new life, your new personality, your new limits. And they also are really helpful if you have post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of your injury. And then you have your family counselors that can help. Because after a brain injury, your role in your family changes, and the family counselor can help with managing those issues and talking about the role changes and how the kids are going to be raised and bills are going to be paid and that kind of thing as you navigate through that too. So there's a lot of people that are out there and available that can help you with the various aspects of it, because brain injuries impact like tons of aspects of your life. And there's not just one person you're going to see to help you get better. It's going to be multiple people that are all the little pieces of the puzzle that's going to create your recovery.
Is that something that people have to kind of learn? Do you find that most people you work with do they get that or assume that out of the gate? Or is it more the way we've often been conditioned to say, I've got this problem, here's a solution, boom, boom. The nuance of that, of looking for multiple help, covering all those different things. Do people need education on that, or do they usually tend to anticipate it?
I think they need education on it because, and I've discovered this when I started working in neurology, is that everyone came with any issue that was related to the brain to the neurology department. And they would get frustrated that they weren't getting the care that they need. And one of my favorite parts of my job is explaining everyone's role in the healthcare system to help get this person to feel better. And I usually explain, like, the neurologist is, they're usually a general neurologist, and they take care of brain diseases such as epilepsy, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and other various diseases. They're not necessarily going to be the person you go to for a traumatic brain injury. And not that you can't go. They can order an MRI and do a MoCA test to see if you have any mild cognitive impairments related to your injury. But there's other providers out there that can be more helpful, like such as a physical medicine rehab doctor who, in the olden days, where they were called physiatrists. And so you might hear PMR and a PMR doctor. So they are really great because they help patients who have injuries to the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spine. So they often see, like, patients who have strokes and traumatic brain injuries. And then there's the psychiatrists and the psychologists that I talked about. And then if you had a traumatic brain injury that resulted in a bleed in the brain, then you would be seen and managed by neurosurgery. So there's, like, a lot of people out there that people aren't aware are available for the various issues of the brain. And I just like to say the brain's really, really complicated, and there's so many aspects to it that not one person could have all of that knowledge in their tool bag.
What do you feel like is a realistic goal that people should be aiming for? Like, and I realize I'm saying this after we've talked about how this is all very individualized, so this might be a difficult thing to really answer, I guess. But it strikes me that people always want to know if they're healing how they should. I feel like there's a huge percentage of what we do in therapy when we talk is what they call normalization, being like, yeah, boy, I feel like I'm doing terrible. And oftentimes your therapist can point out, actually, there's a lot of things you're doing very healthy. You're just in a really crummy part of this process, that many people find when they're in the middle, it sucks. But actually, that doesn't mean you're unhealthy. But as people are thinking about that and saying, is it looking how it should, I guess is what I'm saying. Does that make any sense at all as a question?
Yeah, it definitely. So what I normally, like, a lot of my patients ask me, when am I going to get better? What's the recovery? And I usually tell them I don't know. It's individual. But in general, you'll see the most improvement within the first 2 years. So you'll usually see someone return to work within a year or two, which is nice. But after that, the brain still heals. And as I mentioned, the neuroplasticity can continue if supported. And so you will see improvement at each year. And in order to see that improvement, I do recommend start to journal the minute you can, your recovery. And the reason why is because on those really tough days when you're frustrated, you can look back at your journal and see how far you have come. Like, for instance, one of my journal entries was me complaining that I couldn't make coffee and toast at the same time, because I would make the coffee and start the toast, then forget I had the toast, make the coffee, sit down, and wonder why I was still hungry. And then I would go back to find food and I would lose my coffee mug. So it got to the point where I had to just make the coffee, and then I would go and then I'd make the toast. And then, and then I start cooking and I can look back and go, look how far I've come.
Yeah. So that's that marker that you see there. Did you find with that one that there were techniques you could employ to say, okay, I've got to do it differently? Or was it simply repetition? What did you do to help manage something like that?
Yeah. So what I did was I would create checkoff lists. I call them checkoff lists, and say I needed to get dressed and ready for work. And on my checkoff list, I would have get dressed, brush teeth, uh, do my hair, grab my food out of the refrigerator, grab my bag, grab my keys. So I had all that, and I would check it off as I went. And I would use those checkoff lists for various things. And then once that got back into routine, then I was able to do short to-do lists. And so when I and once that's down into routine, you can move on to the to-do list, and the to-do list helps you focus and accomplish the things you plan to do that day. And that is a graduation type thing in your healing too, is that you move from your checkoff list to your to-do list, and then your to-do list gets into categories, and then then you're doing more and more complicated things other than just making coffee and then just making toast.
Do you find, no, I love it. I mean, so kind of starting with it would be a physical list, literally checking off as I go kind of thing. And,
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Do most people find that then they start to kind of internalize that with repetition, that it's become habitual? I mean, is what it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I would use the checkoff list, like how to fill my bag, like make sure my wallet was in there. So I'd have the wallet, and then my phone, and then my phone charger, and my dark glasses, and and then I would know that bag was packed and ready to go. And so, yeah, I utilized that a lot until I had it down routine. And then even now, I'll still stick with that same routine,
Yeah. And does that get interfered with by our own psychological or emotional reaction to things? Do people resist that because of either shame or embarrassment, or is it hard for people to embrace the need to adjust?
That I don't, I don't know, because I guess I've lucked out. Anytime I made a recommendation like that to one of my patients, they're like, "Oh, that's a great idea," and they use it.
Yeah, I'm just curious, because it seems to me like it could go either way. I guess, having a technique would probably help lessen that a little bit, kind of thing. Do you find that shame or embarrassment enters into people's adjustment overall? That it's hard to say, for example, maybe I go back to the mortgage guy I met. He was math, boom, boom, boom before, and then he struggled with certain aspects of math, which was huge part of his own self-concept, right? I'm good at math. I work with numbers, and having to, he told me, adjusting to that and being like, I need a little support in this area that's related to something I was very good at before. Do you see that being hard for people?
I have seen that be hard for people. They think they're stupid, or they're lazy. And it's important as clinicians and caregivers to point out, no, you're not those things. There's a reason why, and use these tools, and it'll help kind of compensate for that. But the other issue with that is you have to, in your recovery, if you're going to be left with some significant impacting limitations, you have to be able to let go of the old you, and look at the things that you've lost, but also look at the things that you've gained. Get to know you and your new brain, and you will be able to move forward. But if you don't let go of your old self, and get to know the new you, you will be stuck in that negative rut. Yeah. And I have seen that.
I love a lot of modern approaches, which is very strengths-based. I think that's very good. We talk a lot about that on the podcast, and that's what you're describing, is trying to embrace. And I'm also one, by the way, everybody who listens knows I'm not into like, oh, positivity above all. And it's like, no, what we want to do is broaden the picture to see everything, right? There's negative, there's positive. And I love it. That's a really great concept. I hadn't thought of applying that to this, but kind of like, what are the strengths of my new self? Do you find that's challenging for people to wrap their mind around as far as like, oh, how could this have strengths? This is so tragic. And, or do you find they're hungry for that? Or is it the opposite? Are people like, oh, there's good things, what do you find there? Is that a hard concept?
It is a very hard concept, and I've seen people not get past it. And I think that there's also not a lot of discussion about that process that's out there and easily available. Mm-hmm. Because I figured it out on my own. For some reason, one day I went out on to my deck and was journaling, and I decided I want to see all the things I've lost. I want to visually see the monsters in my thinking. And I wrote it all down. And then I drew a line down the piece of paper and I wrote all the things that I have gained since my car accident. And one of the things was I had more patience for myself and others. I had a more slower pace in life. I had more gratitude and more appreciation. And I spent more time in the moment rather than worrying about the past or the future. I thought these were great things. And I decided that, you know what, I like myself, but I like this new person even better than the person I was before. And I did this kind of on my own, and I share it, in my book in that process. But I've also have been lucky to run across traumatic brain injury podcasts, and this also discussed it. So that discussion is starting to come out that, the best way to recover the first step really is to let go of the old and embrace the new.
Do you have any favorite resources like that? Like you mentioned some podcasts. The official position of The Broken Brain is there are no other podcasts. This is the only one, especially about mental health. But we'll break that.
No, I can't think of any.
When I started, I will say, there were not nearly as many, especially that were having any kind of joy or whimsy associated with them. But now there's a lot of resources that are out there that way. And so we'll go ahead and imagine that they, for the sake of this discussion, that they all exist. No, are there any resources you particularly like that you recommend people to more than others?
One of the books that I recommend is Brain Lash. That is a really good book. And then there's another one. Oh boy, it's like 365 tips to recover from a brain injury. Podcasts, I really enjoyed the TBI therapist. And she isn't doing the podcast anymore, but the episodes are still there and available.
Okay. Cool.
And the other good one is Brain Talk. And they have various brain issue episodes. And one of the podcasts on there is A Fork in the Road. And that podcast is done by a caregiver of a traumatic brain injury survivor. So it's kind of a different perspective.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier, thank you for those resources too. I feel like putting those things together is also something that is very helpful. And along with too, I really appreciate you sharing some of these very personal things, because I think they're a bit more powerful coming from someone who's been through it. I mean, someone comes to see someone like me, for example, who might be aware of some of those techniques. I think it lands differently when a person with general awareness is like, make a list of all the things you've gained as well as lost. And it's like, okay, thanks. You have no idea what you're. That's how I'm just, maybe I'm projecting how I would feel in that person's shoes. Whereas it's someone who's like, oh, I've been through this. This helped me. It's like, oh, okay, this probably is likely more pertinent, right? Than someone. If I was to say it, I'd have to, it's. Now I can say it because I've met you. I met someone who did this and it helped. That helps because it's more meaningful, right? So having someone who's been there as a healthcare provider is huge.
Well, I think that goes back to the power of
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What that power story?
The power of story is it's not just saying you should do da 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 da. It's telling your story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's really nice is hearing the various stories of other traumatic brain injury survivors, because it helps make it, of course, more human.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they share something that worked for them, it may work for the other people that they're telling their story to. So humans like stories. Historically, you can look back. And I think that's what resonates with people and is telling your story.
Yeah. I was curious, did you work at all in the medical field before this? You mentioned that it drifted you towards a sort of a specialization, but did you work in the medical field before your car accident?
Yes, I'd been a cardiology nurse practitioner for 20 years. So it was all about the heart.
Right. Huh.
And then I had the brain injury.
Kind of a big change in specialty, it seems to me. There's a lot to learn, obviously, right?
Tons to learn. And I loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
And that was, it was also a time in my recovery where I could tolerate learning more and doing more. And I think it was a really good decision because I think that it supported my recovery with that extra learning at that point in my life.
Right. Well, and for anyone out there who doesn't know, I mean, being a nurse practitioner, we're talking tons of schooling, tons of experience that you have to get to go through that. So obviously you were very accustomed to learning and education and all that. And I guess you knew very well what worked for you if you got through a nurse practitioner program and learning and ongoing education. Did you was it a struggle to have to learn differently? I don't know how different it was for you to have to re-engage with new training and new information.
Well, I'm glad that you asked me that question because it's definitely something I would love to share with people is that the way everyone learns in their own way. So you have your kinetic learners, you have your, people who like to read, people who like to do, people who like to see kind of thing. And I was one of those people prior to my head injury that I like to read about the procedure I was going to do, then I'd like to see it, and then I'd like to do the hands-on. And after my head injury, I was so bummed out that my reading tolerance was cut down to about 5 to 10 minutes, whereas before I used to read for hours. And so I had to learn a new way to learn. And I learned that I could learn from listening to audiobooks or from watching. Fortunately, my brain injury occurred during a time where there's YouTube, where I could watch a video. And so and before my head injury, there's no way I could do audio. I had to see it. It had to be concrete. Now, after my head injury, I learned tons by just listening.
Well, that's fascinating because that really draws out that strength-based focus that you mentioned, which is I lost this. Oh, but I gained this. I didn't have this before. Whether or not you wanted to, or would have, or if it was a menu, whether or not you would have ordered that or not, you got it. That's an interesting. So not just a change in abilities, and maybe this is that almost gets into. I don't know if it's fair to call it even a stereotype people have of like it's all loss. Oh, you can't do this as well. Oh, can you really? Don't bite off more than you can chew, kind of thing. And it's like, oh no, I just chew differently. No.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but
exactly. And then you talked about pushing yourself. Another thing since we were talking about this was, I'd lost that ability to read hours and hours and hours. Right. So I had listened to another traumatic brain injury person's book, and she talked about how she got back into reading and getting her language and so forth working was reading poetry. And so I was like, hey, I could do that. So I really got into reading modern poetry. And it gave me the sense of accomplishment that I was able to read a poem.
Mhm.
And then, as time goes by, you can read more than just one poem, then you go into two. And then the other thing too was reading comic books
Anybody who's
because,
listened, once again, knows I'm a big fan of that. We've
oh,
done
me
whole
too. Me
episodes
too.
about comics and Marvel movies and things like that. There's a lot of that in our back
Yeah,
catalog. So
for sure.
that's pretty cool. So you gravitated towards that.
Yes, because when you get those single issues, they're super short. So it's easy to pick them up and read a couple pages. And then you get to enjoy the art, which is also stimulating your brain. And as time passes, instead of just reading a couple pages of the comic, you may be able to finish the one, I guess, episode. I don't know what is a single booklet,
Like just like an issue or a
Yeah, like an issue, but not necessarily the compilation.
right.
Those are bigger.
Right. Where they make a book, right? Exactly. Like if
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
right, and if you're
But
going to read them
but
along Halloween or something, yeah.
yeah. So if you're a big reader and you miss reading, or you need to work on your reading, or you want to encourage your brain to heal and grow, think about those small things that you can do, whether it's the poetry or picking up the comic book. And then for your bigger reads that you have to do for work or school, really consider those audiobooks.
Gotcha. And that would be yet another kind of involvement a support person could. If I don't have an audio option or a video option, someone could maybe help with that, or like work together with that. And
yeah,
the nice thing is I used to work as a counselor at a college, and one thing I learned there is that as far as like PDF digital copies, audio copies of things like textbooks and things, it had to do with ADA laws that companies, when we would approach them and say, we've got a student with some accommodations, we need a different version of this text. My impression anyway from working with the counselor who was in charge of that was they had to. I mean, you know what I mean? Those things needed to be available. And in all case, I don't think we ever had someone say, what? They always had something available, even if it wasn't available for general purchase. Those things often exist, let me say. And sometimes they're not generally available, but just it's always worth asking because sometimes those do exist. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, and then your devices, your iPhone, your iPad, your laptop, they have accessibility settings in there. Some people aren't aware of that. And you can set up speak with go into your settings, set up speak, and that's where you can highlight a couple paragraphs in an article, and your computer will read the article to you.
Oh. Yes, that's interesting because yes, it will, even if it wasn't intended by the publisher of whatever, it can still be read. Huh. I really like this idea too, because if I didn't know that I should start checking out essentially other modes of learning and even other media, if I don't enjoy things I used to enjoy, it'd be easy to focus on the loss there. But to assume there's probably something else that's changed. I wonder if these other modes that didn't work for me before, I should kind of go through and try them out. That's a great tip, once again, or great strategy for people to investigate what I have, how I function differently instead of just badly or whatever it is that we're taught to assume, right? Those assumptions and those perceptions can be very limiting at times.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're a caregiver, you can, if you happen to listen to this, or, you can support your survivor by saying, hey, I heard this helps, to try to get them, away from banging their head against that wall, be able to show them, hey, you can walk around the wall.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through it.
And even just having hope. I think hope is such a powerful thing through any kind of trauma or major life adjustment, is being able to work through that. And if I believe that everything's over, the good times are over, then it's easy for it to really feel like they are because I don't notice them or don't see them or don't look for them, So I think it's very powerful feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. But when I was early into my recovery and I was like reading all these books, trying to get better, that's all I wanted was hope. All I wanted was someone to say, hey, things are tough right now, but they're going to eventually get better over time. There is hope. And so when I wrote my book, I was like, okay, my book has got to be about hope because that's what I want people to first know. There is hope. And they can get better and stronger and embrace their new self and their new brain.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Very important feedback, very important information for people out there. As I always say on the show, if you think you don't know anyone who this has affected them, you probably are wrong. You probably do know people who this has affected. All those of you that are out there. And, if you don't know anyone directly, you definitely have organizations and places in your life where awareness of this will help one way or the other. I am so grateful to be able to spend this time with you. I always ask people to share something that that's near and dear to their heart in the way of a charity. Could be a nonprofit organization, or maybe it's just something that you believe in strongly when it comes to community involvement, or really anything like that has to do with connecting, whether it's about this topic or whether it isn't. Is there anything you'd like to share with everybody out there?
Well, I do have a YouTube channel, and so I share a lot of these tips and tricks and information in my videos, and I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So I just want the information out there, and I want it to be easy and accessible. And that was really important to me. And my book is also on Audible. That was extremely important to me because I know it's so exhausting and tiring to read and difficult to read after a head injury. So those are the things that I would share.
Great. Wonderful. And what's the name of your YouTube channel? Did you say that? Maybe you said it.
You can find it. If you type in Kelly Tuttle after the crash.
Great. Yeah, then that'll take you. And nowadays it's sometimes even better to know what to type into a search than it is to know. I know for some reason my YouTube channel comes up easier if you Google the Broken Brain Podcast on YouTube rather than search it on YouTube. Don't know why, but it does seem to be that way oftentimes.
Yeah, it can be tricky to find stuff for sure.
Well, everybody out there who's listening, thank you. I hope that you find the ways to apply this into your life because, like I said, it is related to most, if not all, of us out there have some connection to people. And if you don't, you probably will. You'll run into it at some point. Knowing things is always more helpful. If anybody out there would like to get involved with the program, either involved with kind of programming and what we discuss and what themes, or if you'd like to support the program through our Patreon or through a couple of our sponsor agreements we have with some vendors, best place to look for that is at my website, dwighthurst.com/support. Excuse me, I almost said the wrong thing. Don't go the wrong thing, go to the right thing. dwighthurst.com/support is one easy way that also saves you having to hear me rail on about all those different options. Even just giving us a review or sharing this episode with other people is a wonderful way that's non-financial to help support the work we're doing on The Broken Brain. So, Kelly, thank you so much again for being here, and best of luck in all the stuff that you're working on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtamparts.com.